All right, Guru Nation, welcome back to another episode of Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru. We bring you the hard-hitting truth of what's
Hard
out
hitting.
there.
I like it.
Yeah,
Hard hitting.
hard-hitting truth. So, Chris, we wrote this article along with Eileen Schneider, the writer. She actually did the majority of the writing. Um, on this sponsor that's not paying sites. And we've actually been hearing about this sponsor for
Quite some
almost a
time.
year now.
Yeah,
Almost a
quite some
year.
time. Well,
Uh,
what we're going to get into in depth, it hasn't been a year. It's probably been what, 8 months, six
right,
months, something
right,
like that.
right. But there were several red flags. I mean, I don't know. We can unpack some of it, but the company's called Romark Therapeutics or Romark Pharma. We'll get into the article um, right now, but this doesn't happen that often. It did happen a lot more frequently than it does now in 2008 during the Great Recession when biotechs were going bankrupt. Basically, publicly traded biotechs getting delisted from NASDAQ and then running out of money and going bankrupt. So I know of some sites back then that did studies that didn't get paid. In this case, we're dealing with a private company. It's not publicly traded.
So
And they had
remember,
to secure financing on their own, which apparently someone forgot to do.
yeah, definitely. A big forget. That's a big forget.
Right.
But if you recall back in, I think it was 2012, one of our research sites was awarded a study.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was negotiating the budget, and they just weren't paying reasonable costs for the different assessments on the budget. And I discussed this with you if you recall. You probably don't, but again, this was 2012, so 9 years ago. And they, we finally just said, hey, you have to meet these minimums or we just can't do the study. And they said, well, unfortunately, we can't pay you that, so we're not going to utilize your site. And lo and behold, like 6 months later, we got an email because we were still on the email thread.
Mm-hmm.
This part you might recall. We
Yeah.
got an email from all the sites how the sponsor wasn't paying them. Do you recall that?
I do recall that. I forgot the
Yeah,
sponsor's name,
I
but
do
it was
too.
a biotech, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be a key warning in terms of whether or not this sponsor went a different route, I think, though, in terms of what they're willing to pay sites.
This sponsor went a different route. So, yeah, what the difference with that sponsor from Romark, first one is they're publicly traded. So their they've already done what they're supposed to do to secure financing. This is how companies grow and scale. They go public. This is why
Mm-hmm.
the public markets exist for cases like this, right?
Yep.
Now, things can go bad when the companies go bankrupt. Companies go bankrupt all the time that are publicly traded, and then their vendors are SOL. And in research, it's no different. It's just in research, we typically are dealing with well capitalized study sponsors, right? Even the small market cap ones, like they're well capitalized, unless it's in a very bad market like 2008 or 2012 was like it was getting better. But I guess that example that you brought up shows that it can happen anytime.
Yep.
You just got to be careful. So if you're dealing with a penny stock or one of these stocks that's you're not too sure about, I mean, you got to do your due diligence. And this is kind of the point of this. It's not really to throw shade at Romark. We don't know anything about Romark other than this article that we wrote and what we've heard. We don't know anyone there. We don't have a history with them. I mean, it could have been any company, right? It's just there's a lot of lessons here for sites. And if you want to read the full article, it's underneath the show notes. It's on latinosinClinicalResearch.com. Um, it's a COVID study, so I'm not going to get into all the background, but basically, to me, the first red flag is not publicly traded. Not always a red flag, but to me, it's a red flag. Another one was the fact that I've never heard of them before, and we didn't do this study at our sites, so um, we haven't done this study for Romark, thankfully. Um,
Somebody I know is pushing real hard to get this study, though.
at a someone we know.
Yeah, someone you know very well.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure. Not sure who, but
Uh,
we know a few sites that have done this study and are still doing this study.
well, so the person that was pushing, you kept saying to me, "Hey, why don't we get this study for our sites?"
Hmm.
And I don't know. I just never wanted to get this study for our sites for a number of reasons, but it's a good thing we didn't get this study.
Yeah, thankfully we did not get this study. Because it would have been disastrous. And all jokes aside, this can actually put, and I mean, the dust may settle here, and maybe Romark's gonna end up paying everyone like they said they would.
Right?
Um,
Time will tell.
yeah, and time will tell. But for some sites that are just getting started, we know a few sites that this is their first study.
Yep.
And if they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in expenses with the anticipation that they're getting reimbursed, because in research you don't really have to worry about this stuff, but every now and then you get a company like Romark or a situation like this
Hmm.
where it becomes a huge problem. It could put companies out of business. I mean, who knows, maybe there will be some sites going out of business. We don't know all the sites in these studies. We know like a handful of them.
So I've been doing this for 13 years. I've been working in the research industry for 13 years, and this is the second time only that I've heard of this happening, where
Hmm.
where I could identify the sponsor. The previous sponsor that we spoke of, if I looked through my email, I could find their name. Um, but it's only twice in 13 years. So it does happen. It just doesn't happen often.
Right. And there are lessons to be learned. I mean, the first one is look up as best you can, the financial standing of the company. If they're publicly traded, look at their stock price, read some investor. This is why all the biotech stuff I'm doing and we're doing on the clinical research circle is still important. I mean, you got to learn that stuff a little bit if you're a site owner. You got to understand what makes a stable company. Look at their balance sheet, look at how much debt they have, look at what contracts they have. If you can, look at previous studies. There's plenty of analysts out there for these companies. Now, when they're private like this, that's immediately a red flag. One of our clients looked them up on Dun and Bradstreet, and their which is the credit agency for companies, and it came back risky, do not do business with on Dun and Bradstreet.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they decided to do business with them anyways. Um, because this is almost unheard of in research, but just because it's unheard of doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And just because it doesn't happen that often doesn't mean that this is not something the industry should talk about. And I think if this industry is already, and I'm pretty anti regulations for the most part, but if this industry is so heavily regulated, I think we should regulate the financial stability of sponsors as best as we can. Somebody should do that. I mean, it's important. The patients at the end of the day are victims in this too. And we write
Yeah.
about that in the article also.
So in what way are they victims?
So let's say a patient's in the study and doing well, and this is
Hmm.
happening a lot. Okay. Patients in the study doing well, the site hasn't got paid. The sites tell us all the patients, hey, we got to withdraw you from the study. We're sorry. And because we're going to go out of business.
But the patients have been paid for their time.
They're paid for their time, but they're doing well on the study drug and they signed up to finish the study in
Sure.
theory.
So what you're saying is in the sense of being victims, it's just that the sponsor's not fulfilling what they stated would be the timeline for the study.
It's anti-patient centric, which is the last thing the industry needs.
Sure.
And I bet you there's been not a bet, we know for a fact there's been patients dropped out from this study because of
Hmm.
that. You think
Sure.
those people will ever do a study again? I mean, some of them will, but many of them won't. And they're gonna tell all their friends, hey, I was in a study, they took me out, they didn't pay me, or maybe the site did pay them. Who knows? I mean,
Well,
basically, what Romark did was left it up to the sites to sponsor their study.
sure. Sure.
This is what they did.
But that's very common because one of our clients asked me this the other day. Hey, can the patients be paid by Clink card? And I said, well, the sponsors rarely offer that. I mean, they do on occasion, but that's not common. If you want to use Clink card, you'll have to pay for it yourself. So this is a common occurrence, even with very large sponsors, in which the sites have to fund the stipends themselves, in which they get reimbursement for. So
Exactly.
that's
Up
not
front.
uncommon.
That's not uncommon up front, but that you're gonna get reimbursed for.
Yeah,
Well, in this case, the sites are sponsoring everything up front and they're not getting reimbursed with anything except promises.
right.
So
Yeah.
that's impacting. I mean, Romark's basically, and I don't know if they did this intentionally or not. Probably not. They probably. My suspicion is, and this is just a guess, their investors got nervous because the COVID, eh, all the numbers are going down, and at the same time, the data for their drug, I'm just speculating, was not looking good. Um,
Complete speculation. We have no idea if
we have
that's the
no
case or
clue.
not. Or not.
We have no clue. I mean, we have anonymous sources, but we didn't even get into this in the article because they don't
Right.
know either.
Yeah, I have no
That's
idea what
just
the efficacy is.
that's just my speculation because if the data were to be good, investors would be more interested in something like this. Because, like you're saying, and like the J&J thing today, that's been put on hold because of some
Hmm.
issues. We do need treatments. Like it's not just about the vaccine; we need treatments.
Yep.
Um, so there is a demand for this, but I don't know. They probably the financing they thought they were going to secure, they couldn't get, and the company has bad credit rating, so I doubt they can get credit from banks. And so all they're left with is like VC firms.
Do you know for a fact they have a bad credit rating?
Yeah, Dun and Bradstreet, bad.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah. So think about this for a second. I mean, let's think. Their budget is like millions of dollars per site, basically, right? What they told sites, 6 figures to 7 figures if the sites enroll all the patients they're supposed to.
Sure.
It's not a bad budget.
Yeah.
And now they can't get their investors that they thought they had get nervous for whatever reasons. I think because COVID numbers are going down and because the data just wasn't looking good. And they can't go to banks. They can't get a company credit line.
Right.
So now they're just left with angel investor VCs. Who's going to want to do that? And so there was actually a town hall meeting. So the first half of the article is all about their background. And here's the thing about Romark. They're actually one of the key principles is Jean Francois Rossignol, and he is like world renowned in creating this NT, basically nitric oxide. Oh, here it is. Nitazo nitazoxanide extended release. So this guy like pioneered that. He's been doing research on this for a long time. It's not like this is a con artist who is one of the key principles of this company. But he's not running the business. He's just the scientist.
Hmm.
He hired business people like Mark Ayers, who's the CEO who was on the town hall meeting, to manage this. Right? This guy's not in charge of financing anything like that. He just comes up with ideas. So if you did it like your due diligence, you would say, okay, this is a world-renowned scientist. I mean, he probably published in Science and Nature and all that stuff too. So doctors might be feeling, okay, this is a company that he's a part of. This is a safe company. So it just goes to show, even if you do the due diligence, you get caught. You can get caught in something like this. And I guess the take-home message is just be careful. I mean, if your gut tells you, like you, Chris, you said no to this study,
Hmm.
whereas people we know very well wanted to do it.
Yeah, we
I
know.
don't know if myself was one of them.
Yeah, you were one of them. You kept pushing it. We should
Okay,
be
so
doing this study.
I would, yeah. So it just goes to show you guys that you get to
Yeah, there's no surefire way to avoid this. There just isn't.
no. But what was it that made you say no?
Well, one
Because
of them,
your instinct said no.
so one of the reasons was that it was a COVID study, and none of our sites are really set up for COVID.
Hmm.
But it was just the fact that, so we know four people, four different sites who are not getting paid by by this company. And I believe they're all in the six-figure realm. But one of them was telling me that they had submitted their startup fee and it's been months and they just keep telling them they'll get it in 2 weeks. And I just didn't like that. Just
Yeah.
something about, it just set off an alarm bell. And I was just like, yeah, I kept telling you, yeah, I'll look into it, but I wasn't going to look into it because I just wasn't
Yeah,
wasn't
and I'm
thrilled with that.
all offense. I actually forgot that I was wanting to get this study. So yeah, I'm one of those people that wanted to get this study. Oh, that's why you were saying I know this person very well. It's me.
Yes,
I get
yeah,
it. I get it. I'm
exactly.
actually trying
I
to think.
said, you know this person very well.
I'm trying to think. Who are you talking about? Yes, yes. Now, a red flag to me would be like a huge budget like that with as many sites. So I don't know if because you talk to a lot of sites more than me who are like budget wise regarding this study.
Mhm.
And it's basically competitive enrollment. They wanted like something like 1,500 patients, right?
Mhm.
We have it in the thing here. The multi-center randomized double-blind trial was designed to study as many as 800 patients 12 years and older. They also had other studies that they did. They did a prevention study too,
Right.
right? Where they wanted like either 800. So between the two was like 1,600. They probably had like 70 sites or more.
Again, this is speculation. We don't know any of this for fact, but
Yeah, I mean, we can go on clinicaltrials.gov and see
right,
because we can just do the numbers.
right.
Oh yeah,
1407.
1,407 participants in this one trial. Okay,
Right.
for pre and post exposure prophylaxis, and we know sites that did this study too, and I think they didn't get paid as well, and they did the other one concurrently for the mild to moderate symptoms concurrently. So
Mhm.
sites are out. I mean, look, 1,400 patients in one study using 26 sites. So let's say the other one was 800, so you're using like 15 sites. Okay, you got 30 sites basically getting promised somewhere, and we're just guessing.
40 sites, not 30.
Okay, 40 sites getting what per completed patient? Would you guess?
Yeah, 10 grand. I don't know.
Okay, and that's on the low end, but let's say 10 grand. Okay, so 1,400 times 10 is
It's 14 million.
14 million that they have to pay to all the sites for one study.
Right.
And then you've got more studies. So you've got sites out six figures on average, 5 to 6 figures that
Mm.
they're out, right? So in 2020, Romark started 2 phase 3 trials for the prevention of COVID. That's the one of the ones we saw. Around the third quarter of 2020, we were fielding several newer sites asking if it was normal for sponsors not to pay. Several months later, the volume kept getting larger and larger. Then we started paying attention. Who is Romark? So sites are out 6 figures on average each because of not getting paid. And to a site that's just getting started, or even a site for that matter that's experienced, established, 6 figures is a lot of money. I mean, that's
Mhm.
payroll for at least several months, for some sites for entire year payroll.
Yep. Yep.
All right. So we started hearing things, then we started Googling. We looked into it. We saw an article sometime around the fall of last year that Romark got evicted from one of their offices. Then they had a call about that saying, no, that's just the journalist. That was a hit piece. We wanted to get out, whatever. We gave them the benefit of the doubt. There's a large study broker, a very reputable one, that had sent Romark a lot of sites. And that study broker also is not getting paid. And
As far
so
as we know.
as far as we know, we don't know. We haven't talked to anyone at that study broker, and we're not going to mention them because it's kind of a negative story, and they are a reputable broker, so we're
Mhm.
not going to mention them. But basically, this reputable study broker forced. There's no better way to put it. Forced the CEO, Mark Ayers, to host this virtual town hall meeting, which was just last week on Thursday. But only the sites in that broker's network. So what does that tell you? That tells you that Romark didn't want to do it. And number two, only did it because they had to. And number three, they don't really care about the sites because they would have just invited all the sites, because all the sites have this question, not just the ones from our study broker.
Sure.
All the sites have these questions.
Completely agree.
So that's another question we raised in the article. The theme of the call was for Romark to attempt to reassure the sites that they are part of that financing is getting finalized. In their credit, in Romark's credit, and maybe this was part of the strategy, they did not have a call to action to enter data. They didn't, we were kind of expecting that they would. From what our anonymous sources told us, there was no such thing as call to actions to enter data. I think honestly the sites are smarter than that, and they're beyond that at
But
this
there was
point.
an appeal to their goodwill, right?
There was appeal to to the higher value, which
Mhm.
if you read from the 48 laws of power, I think it was 48 laws of power, always appeal to the higher value. Because then you're distracting from the real issue, right? So the appeal was, hey, we're doing this for the patients. We're doing this to make a difference, which we agree. This is what research is
Politicians do this
for.
all the time.
Exactly. But where the rubber meets the road is where these sites are not in this. They didn't agree to do this study for free.
Right.
They're not nonprofits. These are for-profit companies operating in the United States, the most capitalistic country in the world. So, and Romark's trying to make money out of this too. They're not doing this out of their goodwill, right? But it looks like they're not going to. It looks like they have a real disaster on their hands. And time will tell if they're going to pay. My bet would be no. Your bet was no 6 months ago. I was a little more optimistic.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's still a firm and solid no.
yeah, I've joined you now on the firm and solid no. It just took me some time. Um, we had so you can go read the article word for word. We had anonymous source in there writing exactly what was being said, more or less like a summary. So in the article towards the end, Chris and I wrote, whether any sites get paid is almost besides the point. Few key takeaways for this. Understand the sponsor's financial situation that we discussed. Most are publicly traded, so you can look at their financially. Everything's open. With private companies like this, it's dangerous, especially if they're private and not a household name. For example, I don't know if it was Boehringer Ingelheim, but we did a study with a really big household name sponsor, and I was looking because I'm curious at the stock. I don't know if it was Boehringer or not, but it was a household name, and at that time they were not public. They had been public before, then they went private for different reasons. You can go private and then you go public again. IKEA was the same. IKEA was public, then it went private, now it's public again. So if it's not a household name and it's not publicly traded, that's a double, to me, red flag. You got to look into it. Then you got to look into exactly what the budgets look like, how many sites, and just do the math like we just did, right? Just back of the napkin math. How is this company? Do a Dun and Bradstreet check. You can find out estimates of their yearly revenues.
Now, with that said, I would add, though, that just because they're not publicly listed does not mean you can't do business with them. I mean, we've done studies with non-listed companies. Dr. Reddy's, when they first started doing research in the United States, they weren't listed. So,
Right.
And we got paid. We got paid everything we were owed.
That's true. But Dr. Reddy's lab is a very big company in India. They are
Correct.
publicly listed there.
Right. But not here. So,
right. But they have access to capital. That's the point. Romark is not listed anywhere.
True.
They don't have access to capital. That's the problem with this. So Dun and Bradstreet then becomes the next check, right? And if you ran their DNB, you'll find high risk status do not do business with is what it says.
Mm-hmm.
And then Google search, you'd be amazed. Chris, we discovered.
Oh yeah, we found some crazy stuff. Oh, absolutely crazy stuff
on doctors when we do our due diligence on potential PIs and potential business partners.
Yep.
So it might start needing to do the same thing for sponsors, right? Study sponsors. And when dealing with extraordinary late payments from study sponsors, a tactic of last resort for sites has been to hold data hostage. Sponsors pay sites ultimately for one thing, the data. Holding this until payment is received is one way of expediting the process. Other slightly less dramatic options have popularly been to restrict CRA access to conduct IMVs. I've done this a few times. It's funny how fast you'll get your payment when you come up with that as an alternative.
Yeah, the holding data I certainly wouldn't do unless you're willing to burn a bridge.
Right. It's important to understand that these tactics should never come as a substitute for attempts at effective communication between site and sponsor. Soft skills should be the default. Aggressive strategies should rarely, if ever, be used.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's the takeaways. The questions I have for industry, and I know people like Craig Lipset, Joe Dustin, all those people on Clubhouse now. I want to bring this topic up maybe on Clubhouse on Friday, but I would like to have like a industry-wide discussion on this. Should standards be set up to ensure financial solvency and ability to finance the study being submitted to the FDA? Should regulations exist to preemptively reduce or eliminate these types of financially unprepared study sponsors? Does industry owe this service to study participants who also
So,
end up being victims in this situation?
so the downside to this is whenever you implement more regulation, you implement more overhead for the business, right? So
Right.
there's more expenses, thus in return, you're going to receive that passed upon to the consumer. So
Right.
their drug prices are going to be higher. So, you know, there's positives and negatives to consider here.
Yeah.
It would be great if, okay, so let me go this route. I don't think this happens often enough for this to be something to consider, my opinion.
Right. But what about in the next decade when now we're entering the long tail of research where with gene sequencing, long read sequencing, it's gonna spur with CRISPR, it's gonna spur a whole bunch of brand new first time sponsors
Sure.
into the space. And I mean, it potentially could be it could become more common. And I don't know if that's
So,
something the industry actually wants or is prepared for.
so we already have a system set up to handle these problems, right? I don't think the FDA is the source to handle this problem. And the problems are the court system, right? Lawsuits and the like. Um, there's no patient safety here per se. I mean, yeah, some patients may have to withdraw early, but so long as, and that's where it's up to the PI just to make sure the patient's safe, right?
Right.
Regardless of being paid or not. Um,
But that's not fair for the PI because they're
sure, it's not fair, but that's why you have the system as it's set up, right? Where
right.
you can sue. And I mean, the only other option here would be as a site would be to take initial payment up front. Not that the
Like the
sponsor would
CROs do. Like the CROs do.
exactly, or take it in a brokerage account or something
Yeah.
along those lines. But no sponsor is going to agree to that, though, especially a
Speaking of
reputable
which,
one.
Romark contracted their own CRAs, so they didn't hire a CRO,
Right.
which is not uncommon, but it's usually done in bigger sponsors.
Mm-hmm.
Smaller sponsors almost always outsource to CROs.
Did you want it? Because this wasn't mentioned in the article, which I've
It
read.
wasn't, which is this is why we like the podcast.
Do you want to mention your conversation with a particular CRA, or somebody told us about a conversation with a CRA in Romark?
I don't recall, but go ahead and remind me.
Okay, well, I edit this out if this is shouldn't be here, but somebody, I forget who, that I was talking to that's spoke with a CRA for their site. Um, I remember who it was. It was um, so they were saying they had a conversation with the CRA, and the CRA, and they told the CRA, you know, you're not going to be allowed on site. We haven't been receiving payment. And the CRA said, yeah, I understand. I haven't been paid for 6 months or 6 weeks at some time frame, and they said they're about done doing CRA
Wow.
work for them too.
Okay. And this was like I do remember now. This was like 6 months ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago. I don't remember how long ago.
And
But
I've also heard from other sites. We have a lot of anonymous sources in this study. It's not just one. There's a
no,
lot
we have four.
more.
Well, four that I can think of.
Four officially that talked to Eileen. We have more that just talk to us separately outside of this
I
and on
still only think of.
LinkedIn and things like that.
Okay, well, I don't get on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
so
No, I'm tired. I'm speaking for the both of us.
right.
Um, there from one of them, I heard that their uh CRAs were removing Romark from their work history, so they kind of had a suspicion something was coming too.
Wow, really?
Yeah, yeah, I heard that also through the grapevine. That didn't make the article either.
Huh.
But yeah, these are the things to consider. I mean, a lot of red flags if you look closely, but the thing with these red flags is they're so far apart from each other that in between each warning sign, you could have theoretically seen 50 more patient visits, right, as a site. And you're
What
out
I
of pocket now for all these costs.
what I would recommend to avoid this scenario is immediately, if you're working with an unknown, right? If it's a common household name, Pfizer, Bayer, Lilly, whatever, you don't need to worry about this stuff. But if it's something unknown, I would immediately file for my startup payment and I would not do any work until I received it.
Yeah. I mean, yes, that's one way. First thing I would do is check the public markets and I would look at the health of the stock and look at the market cap and look at the um, assets. I mean, most of these small biotechs, they don't make revenue anyways, but they have access to enough of a market cap to where they can pay for a study like this.
Right.
This is why this doesn't happen that often. So when you get a company like this that's not publicly traded, um, that's the initial red flag, right? Not a household name and not publicly traded
Hmm.
anywhere on any market. Not in Mexico, not in India, not in China market, nowhere.
Hmm.
So that's double red flags there. And we had a lot of sites taking this study. And look, this is definitely brings up a lot of interesting talking points for industry heads. And I'll challenge them to. I would like to send out a personal challenge to give this some thought because there's definitely ethical implications here when you involve patients. And yeah, just I thought it was interesting beyond just being about Romark because this is not a story about Romark. Romark is just the framework for this topic that would have happened anyways with someone else.
Sure.
So that's it. Anything else?
No, I think we covered about everything we're aware of.
Yeah, so link to the article underneath. Be careful, guys. Again, doesn't happen that often. Clinical research is a great business to be a site.
Yep. Twice in 13 years for me. So,
The first 5 years of me running my site, I didn't even keep account payables. Account receivables. I just knew, okay, I'm working with Pfizer, with Johnson and Johnson, with another publicly traded company at that time. I had like 3 or 4 of these. So I'm like, they're gonna pay. This is not a matter of whether they can afford to pay me or not. It's more a matter of how long is it gonna take them to pay me. But it's not because they can't. It's because of their red tape that they have set up. This needs to trigger this for this to trigger that to get a payment.
and just to back up what you're saying, you're as a site, you're much more likely, I mean, many, many times more likely to be overpaid to work on a study than not paid.
That's right.
Overpaid happens way more frequently. Again, I'm only aware of 2 incidents since I've been doing this. I've heard of dozens and dozens of incidents of overpayment to sites.
Hmm.
So that's much more likely to happen to you,
Yeah.
which also
So
can be a pain, but at least you're getting paid. You
at
have to
least
pay
you're
it
getting
back.
paid. Yeah. First 5 years of me running my site, they didn't have time, so I never checked what I'm owed. I just assumed, okay, they're good for it, and it always was. Or like you said, they overpaid, and then they asked for some money back
Yep.
at the end of the study. So
Yep.
if someone's sitting on the fence about wanting to start a site, this shouldn't. The purpose of this is not to scare you from doing that.
Just be
Um,
cautious. Be somewhat cautious. I think this happens so infrequently. I don't think you really need to worry about it. But in Dan's point, the only time you really need to worry about this is if the company's unknown, not listed publicly, and unknown.
but
And
what
I
if in
agree
the
with that.
next decade though, because we are entering the long
Sure,
tail,
sure.
it could happen more.
And if you're again, like I said, in that case where you're going to start working with, if there's a lot of unknown quantities or unknown elements getting involved in research, I would first get my startup payment before I would do any work.
Yeah.
At least that startup payment should cover one patient, right? Their stipends and paying people for their work. And
Hmm.
then once you get that patient enrolled through the study, you're going to get paid on that patient. So you'll know if you're getting paid or not, right?
Hmm.
I think you're covering your costs at least.
Yep. And anything else?
No.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching and listening, and hopefully we learned a thing or two from this. And catch y'all later. Bye bye.